We're going to talk today about modern methodologies for securing OT and legacy networks. And we're going to do something a little bit different today than we do on most of our webinars. This is going to be much more of just kind of a conversational, almost podcast, style approach. We've got a couple of great folks joining me today with lots of knowledge around securing OT and legacy systems. So I think this is going to be good. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's just going to be a good kind of free-flowing conversation around the challenges we're seeing and ways that enterprises can improve OT security. So my name is John Moran. I'm the technical director on the business development team here at Tufin. And I'm joined by Ricky Egge, also from Tufin, who is the director of our SE teams here in the Americas region. And also Willie Nelson, who is the field CISO at Fortinet for OT security. So guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm excited. I think we're going to have some good conversations. We did kick it off. I know both of you guys have quite a bit of experience in dealing with customers of all sizes across verticals and regulatory requirements. So I'm interested to hear from both of you kind of what you see as some of the challenges that customers are facing today in securing their OT networks and kind of blending them with the existing IT networks they have.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background coming from network and security engineering and architecture, one of the big challenges I'm going to use is actually from my history. I worked for for defense contractor, and we had a big flat kind of layer 2 network, and we had to come in and segment it after a breach. So there was a lot of challenges that went along with that. One of the biggest ones was some of the manufacturing equipment we ran was very expensive. In one case, the machine was $25 million if we wanted to take and upgrade it from a Windows XP system to something more modern. Whether it was like Windows 7, I think at the time. But it's still the same problems. A lot of those systems are still out there in production, and it was how do I actually protect that system that we're not going to spend $25 million to upgrade the OS, right? And that was one of the big challenges from the field is starting with that mentality of, how do I protect something legacy, et cetera.
Thanks for having me, first of all. To add to what Ricky's saying, as a practitioner, but also as somebody who has worked with multiple clients, seems like where it all begins is the visibility piece. What do I have? And then everybody kind of goes through this, oh crap. You see things like XP, you're seeing things like Vista and ME and these operating systems. You're like, why do these ever exist? Let alone why are they still in existence? And then what are you going to do about it, right? And you have to get past that almost a sticker shock of what am I going to do, and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a report recently that said 80% of the customers that they surveyed had limited visibility into their ICS and their OT networks, right? And there's the old saying, you can't protect what you can't see, right? And people see that, it sounds like kind of a cliche, but it's really true, especially in OT environments where lack of visibility, I think, is a maybe more pervasive problem than it might be in sort of traditional IT, main, core networks, right? Especially when it comes to the security of those networks, right? I think that in some instances that I've experienced, the OT people who are managing the actual OT devices may have a good understanding of what's in the network, but they're concerned with uptime, right? They're concerned with, maintaining those systems, not necessarily the security of them. And a lot of times we see security really is the ones who are lacking visibility into what's going on in those networks. It's kind of a black box. Visibility stops at the OT network perimeter, and what happens inside of that sometimes is kind of a mystery to the enterprise security teams.
So I'm gonna throw something out there that's kind of it may be somewhat confrontational when it comes to from an OT perspective, but we solved this problem 20 years ago with IT, right? 20 years ago in IT, we didn't have visibility either. Mm-hmm. We also didn't patch, and all those sorts of things. So it's not that it's earth shattering. I think the big piece is that the idea is that the safety and the uptime is what was never something that IT had to deal with. But this isn't a new problem. It's one that we've been dealing with for years in multiple verticals, right? But is there a lesson that we can learn from those folks who'd already lived the life 20 years ago, and the Rickies of the world who, had to take that flat network, which, by the way, I think every OT environment, everybody will say it's pretty flat. I can, from this HMI, I can get to the internet. I shouldn't, but I still do it. That's not uncommon. So now what do we do? You identify it. How do you go through this exercise and learn how to take the lessons learned that we've kind of forgotten are there?
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. I mean, I don't think that's controversial at all. I think that it's actually a pretty common thing in IT in general and security in general, that you can look back. A lot of the problems, even outside of OT, they're not new problems. They're new manifestations of problems that we've experienced 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And sometimes we try to, sort of reinvent the wheel when, there's a solution that maybe, worked 10 years ago, that with a little modification, with, applying it to newer technologies, can probably be a very viable solution today, right? So, I mean, Ricky, you've been in the industry for a long time working with customers. What do you see as maybe some of that stuff that we can take from 10, 15 years ago and apply to OT networks?
I think one of the biggest things goes back to what Willie said. It's visibility, right? How did we go about visibility in the data centers and stuff that we actually had control of? And you look at that, and a lot of that was very manual effort back in the day. And it started with, building a spreadsheet, right? That was at the kind of the forefront of some of the tools that we're able to do discovery of your infrastructure. You think of the SolarWinds and the NetBrains and things like that of the world, Infoblocks. They had their different network mapping tools that were just coming about that give you some intelligence, but we had nothing. I mean, like some of the tools that we have today to go out and do that automated discovery and identify some of those endpoints. We've come leaps and bounds in just a decade.
Yeah,
so it's actually finding those tools getting started.
Inventories.
Yeah.
The manual inventories, right? And then Visio came out. You could actually graph it and have some type of image of what this actually looked like. We didn't have the images yet of what the back end of this switch or that firewall looked like, but you had a box and you went from there and said this interface to that interface, and went from there.
Yep.
You started a little bit of just the basics.
Yeah, it was almost playing a game of whose cable is this, right? All right, I know this switch port's connected to something important. Like, where does it go from here?
Yeah, you run the
dirty,
flute, right? You sit there on each end.
Yep, dirty, dusty job.
Yeah.
So what are some good ways to start getting visibility into your OT network, right? Where should enterprises start? I mean, is there, assuming that it's not going to be a completely manual process, we're assuming there's going to have to be some level of automation, like we need to do with just about everything at the scale that we're operating at today. But what do organizations have sort of in their environment right now that they can leverage to start getting visibility into their OT networks? And maybe what, either from a process or a technology standpoint, should they be looking towards to try to fill those gaps?
Ricky, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, so I'll actually start off with a couple of things. The first thing that I'm going to start with is leverage some of the technology you have. Most of our customers that we run into in the field actually have something from a mapping perspective in place. You have vulnerability scanning, which can identify your endpoints. You have a lot of times like that network infrastructure mapping type things, or a NAC that can help you identify some of those endpoints. And then the old school method of sneaker net. I'm going to walk over and find out who owns the manufacturing, who owns my crown jewels. And I'm going to talk to them and understand, what do you have? What are your requirements, right? Because that's the second thing after I have visibility. Whose is this? What is this? And what does it actually need for requirements? Because without that third part, I don't actually have a good understanding of what that system is in there. So that's usually where I started, was scanning and sneaker net.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously I work for Fortinet, right? So the shirt says it. But we've got your your SD-WAN, next generation firewall, they can help you considerably to understand this stuff. Everything from your NAC, your switches, etc. Putting it all together, correlating it, and going from there. But Ricky, I like the comment of the sneakernet, right? So there's so many times I think we forget that you've got to have all that automation tools. It makes it so much easier, but sometimes you just have to go and talk to the right people. Those automation engineers, quite often, they know their environment. They know it left, right, and center. They may not know the security piece of it. And so you have to have that relationship and come over there with hat in hand and say, hey, I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm here to actually, hopefully eliminate pain. And then if you've got those automation tools that you have in place and you've got that relationship, you can kind of start doing that correlation a lot faster than just doing it manually by yourself.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think another thing too, when it comes to visibility that I would touch on is, having visibility into the internals of your OT network is obviously critical, but another area that we see customers sort of struggling with is having visibility into the convergence of their IT and OT networks, right? That same report that I referenced earlier said that in over 50% of the engagements that they were involved in, they discovered either undisclosed or uncontrolled external connections to that OT environment, right? And I think a lot of times, OT networks just get kind of connected, right? And there's very little sort of security around them, despite the fact that they can be really business critical systems, because a lot of times they do have legacy protocols that are being used that have business requirements to connect to vulnerable places in the networks, right? And so not only having the visibility of the internals of your OT network, but also, sort of the externals, right? Where is that OT network kind of spreading out to? What is it connecting to, right? Because that obviously ties back directly to exposed risk, right? We've seen a number of breaches in the past where OT networks are not just utilized as, the target of the attack, right, where they're going to actually execute the attack, but as a beachhead, as a pivot point to compromise a vulnerable OT system and then move laterally within the network. So having that visibility of where everything connects outside of OT, I think is incredibly important as well.
Yeah,
Fortinet actually has a report that we did last year that showed 9 out of 10 customers that answered the survey have experienced at least one incident, and then 75% of those have 3 or more.
Wow.
And that when you think about just the numbers of that and how that looks, it's pretty important to get your arms around this thing.
Yeah, well, that's powerful. Yeah, so I think we've talked about kind of some of the problems, and I don't want it to be all sort of doom and gloom, right? So I want to talk about some some solutions or shift gears a little bit. Ricky, you had mentioned something that I thought was a really interesting example that around the challenges of patching was that $25 million to replace a legacy system, right? And I'm sure that that's not an isolated event, right? I'm sure that there's enterprises that are facing those kind of challenges every day. So in those kind of situations where it's just not feasible, either financially or because of downtime, to just patch a system, what do you do? How do you maintain security for something that is inherently insecure and vulnerable?
I'm going to shock you guys. I'm going to go with segmentation. It's crazy still. I started talking segmentation 20 years ago, and today we're still talking about segmentation. When we have these old systems, a lot of times, especially in OT, the only cure for this is to put them somewhere where you can protect it, right? It's actually figuring out how I can lock this down give everybody access they need to be successful, and limit it to that, right? How do I protect my crown jewels? Because at the end of the day, that $25 million machine was at a $500 million a year revenue facility, right? It was generating a lot of money for the company. So taking it offline, or removing it from the network until they figured out what to do, just was not going to happen. It was $500 million a year. There was no way that thing was coming offline. It was like I had like 2 hours like one day a month. So we had to figure out what the plan was. And for us, it was assigning, figuring out what was part of it. That was talking with the automation engineers that are running that system day to day, right? Understanding what do they need, what all is a part of the manufacturing for this, and then how do I put it into its own segment. And that was the start. So it started documenting the ownership of it, and documenting what the ports and protocols that were required, putting together an architecture diagram, and starting to create artifacts around what that system really was and what it needed to function. So that was the start, was that starting with that segmentation plan and the discovery and the visibility, as Willie mentioned.
Yeah, it's the to put it in a rich language, it's compensating controls, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we live in the world of compensating controls. You can't make impact on those systems. You cannot, from a safety perspective and availability perspective, cost to the company. This isn't email where if email's down, all right, well, it's not the end of the world unless you're an email company. In our case, we're making things, we're developing things. That could be everything from your oil and gas to your pharmaceuticals. There's things that cannot stop from a production perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to live in that world of compensating controls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we see our customers struggle with is really how to understand and contextualize risk, right? Because when you talk about compensating controls, that's exactly what they're designed to mitigate risk, right? But the way that we measure risk from vulnerabilities is typically through scanning, right? You go out and you scan all your systems and it tells you where all the vulnerabilities are, right? But a lot of times those scans lack context, right? So you're constantly dealing with these high severity vulnerabilities that are popping up in your OT networks, and hey, yeah, okay, we know there's a compensating control in there, right? But we've got to go through and kind of manually, say, okay, we can remove these these don't care, these are, maybe they're still a risk, but they're a lower severity risk because there's some compensating controls in there, right? And so one of the things that we've tried to do at Tufin is take the sort of rich repository of network data we have and try to add more context to that risk, right? And that ties back directly to those compensating controls. So we can say, hey, we ingest vulnerability data from third-party vendors, right? We're not a vulnerability scanner. There's tools out there that do it well. We don't want to be one of them. We want to help you enrich that. So we take the vulnerability data from those tools, and we can actually do topology map queries and say, hey, this particular OT asset that has 10 critical vulnerabilities on it, are there any untrusted networks that can actually get to that over that port, over that service? And so we can help you sort of contextualize that risk and help you prioritize the risk in your OT environments much better, right? I think that's a challenge that IT in general struggles with, but because of the reliance so heavily on these sort of compensating controls you guys are talking about, it's an especially large challenge for OT security teams because of the high number of compensating controls and trying to figure out, okay, once we factor all those in, really, where's my actual risk, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one of the things that I think it goes into even building those compensating controls, though, first is understanding what's actually using those systems, right? So I look at the old days. For me, it was Splunk, right? Watching, I have this layer 3 switch and I have like NetFlow or something like that coming off of it, and I'm trying to understand what's actually talking in and out of those networks to those devices. And as you move forward, fast forward 10 years, we're taking what was layer 3 switches and that information now, and a lot of times replacing those with firewalls. You take that a lot of times it was the old Cisco 3750 or something like that was the front end, and you pull that out and you're putting into place a Fortinet firewall that can do all of the same functionality, but now you're able to build that layer 4 up security on top of it. And I think that's some of the things that we see nowadays, right? They're moving away from just having that access list on a switch and moving more to an intelligent security system out there at the edge. And it ties in, you take all of that threat intelligence and the communication intelligence from what Fortinet provides, and then we ingest it. And one of the things that in the old days, right, well, like I said, it was reading Splunk logs and trying to figure out, all right, what are all these things? And that's I think that's one of the things that I've seen out in the field at Tufin too, or especially over the last several years, is customers doing that same thing that I was doing, right? Looking at Splunk logs, not realizing there's tools out there that can take that information and aggregate it for you. And even here at Tufin, we have one, right, in the automatic policy generator that takes all of the intelligence out of those firewalls, everything that's using those rules. And I'll use a real world example. We looked at big engine manufacturer, and when they put a firewall in place, you can't replace the switch with a firewall that says block everything, because business has to function. They replaced it and it said, allow everything, which is what effectively the switch was. But monitored it for a week, and there was 170,000 individual source, destination, and services in and out of that firewall. And it's, when you look at that scope, it's daunting to realize how much communication there is. So you need something to help, like our automatic policy generator, to help tighten that down. I think of the old days of Splunk, I would have created probably 15, 20 generic rules to do it.
Well, I like the words you use from a contextualize, John. That's phenomenal. Even Fortinet, we started doing that ourselves. We now through our own SIM, you can start looking at what is OT, and start understanding where it is on the Purdue model, and what it is communicating with, which is part of that whole, it added context. Because a lot of times, if you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of lines in the log, how are you ever going to find that on your own, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to automate, and you've got to find the right tools, and you got to partner.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep, absolutely.
So I feel like you can't have really any webinar or podcast or any IT discussion without talking about cloud, right? It's like a prerequisite. But joking aside, cloud really is a relevant topic for OT, because there really is and has been a convergence of IT devices, OT devices, connecting up into the cloud. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and I'll share mine as well, on kind of what the future of sort of OT and cloud convergence you think looks like, and what are the challenges and even benefits that you get from OT devices connecting to the cloud. So I'll start with Willie, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. I think benefits still the same, right? It's scalability. It's redundancy. Those things are going to be, whether it's IT, OT, that enablement helps. Now I've gone on a limb, and I'll do it again. I believe OT will be better at cloud adoption than IT. IT tends to, someone draws a line in the sand, says we're going all in, and they just jump in. And then as we've read recently, I think it was last week, the report saying that a lot of companies are going, whoa, and start bringing some of that stuff back. Mm-hmm. I don't think OT is going to be that. We're going to be so much more methodical, because of the fact that the impact that it has to the company and or to individuals. We'll be more methodical in what we move to the cloud, and make sure that it is justified, it is cost effective. All those benefits will be there before we make that change. As far as where we are in the transition, we've got several customers that are the full gamut. Some are just like still say cloud, and they spit and they stomp off. Some are like can't wait to adopt more. And I think that we as professionals, but also our organizations have to be able. That's the challenge for us, is to be able to support both those extremes and everyone in between.
Yeah, it's I'm going to add on to there too. As we move to the cloud, it's a perfect opportunity, right? It's you can either move your problem as it sits, and you take
Yes.
and you transfer it from on-prem where it was probably paid for, you transfer it into the cloud, and now you're paying monthly payments for your problems, right?
Right.
Nobody wants to do that. So take the opportunity, I think, when you as you have the convergence of OT into talking to the cloud in there, take that as an opportunity to understand what you have, and as you said, make effective decisions about how much does this cost, what's the risk of this being here, and as you identify those risks, it's the chance to re-architect and do it the right way and put a much tighter security posture around something that may have been very open previously.
I like it. It's very motivational speaker of you. Take every
Take your chances
problem,
when you get them.
take a problem and see it as an opportunity for growth, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Willie, I think really the point you made was good. I don't think it's controversial at all. When the first time you had shared that with me, it kind of hit me, and it was something I'd never really thought about. But I think you're right. I think it's really true that the way that sort of OT teams and those running the OT networks have approached things have probably really prepared them well for cloud, right? They're not, their goal isn't speed, their goal isn't agility, their goal is uptime and security and resilience, right? And so I think you're right. I think that there's probably a lot that IT teams can learn from that sort of slow, methodical approach. So
Absolutely.
very interesting.
Absolutely.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, I mean, I know we could probably sit and talk about this all day, but we should probably look towards wrapping it up. So I guess I'll just throw it out there. Any last thoughts that you guys want to share? Any takeaways or best practices you guys want to share?
Yeah, I'll kind of start with the kind of three things that I took away, right? Like, why are we doing this? We're a lot of times it's legacy infrastructure, but it's very expensive, right? Understanding why I'm going about something, and then how am I going to go about this? And you talked about building that segmentation plan of this, and then what am I doing today to address it? And it's a lot of times it's gaining that visibility and starting to work with those teams, which I think is probably one of the biggest things we have in a culture of security, right? Is we kind of sit in our little bubble, but we don't reach out and actually talk to the people, and that's kind of one of the things I took away, right? Discovery is actually working with those teams.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the only thing I would add is that, and they're not meant to be just, cliches or words, crawl, walk, run. One thing that a leader in my past that said something to me that has really resonated moving forward is fail fast, partner often. We can't do this ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way as professionals that we can scale at the speed that we need to. You need to adopt a plan on how to use your partners, how to get your intel in, make sure it's actionable, use a vulnerability scanning as an example. So, if I use something and say, hey, somebody came to me and say, well, there's a problem with Oracle. Well, if we don't have Oracle in the environment, I don't care. So make sure it's relevant and then it's actionable. And from there, I think you can do so much more. 95% of our problems, I think, are ours. Those other 5% are, the external. They're the nation states. They're all the other things. But if we can get our basics taken care of, we can all do so much better and sleep better at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree on the sort of back to basics approach, right? And I think that also goes back to what we talked about earlier, looking back at solutions to previous problems that may help sort of inform the decisions and the solutions you're looking for today. I heard somebody, and this is not my original, but I'll reuse it, that there's really no sort of there's no recipe for succeeding in OT security, right? There's no one size fits all approach to succeeding in OT security. There's a one size fits all failing approach for OT security. And that's thinking that you have the one size fits all recipe for success, right? But back to Ricky's point, the visibility and the segmentation, right? You start there. You have to know what you're protecting, and you've got to start, segmenting off your network, and obviously doing it, in a methodical, slow approach, as you mentioned, because they are critical systems, and you're going to have to figure out what can and can't be segmented. And then, I think, designing a point in time security infrastructure is I won't say easy, but it's much easier than maintaining that over time, right? So, like when we talk about zero trust, it's, okay, implementing zero trust is easy, right? I mean, easy in relative terms. Maintaining zero trust is hard, right? And I think that's the same in terms of OT security. And so you have to have those plans, those processes going forward to maintain that level of security. And there has to be some sort of forethought in there. How are we going to continue to scan? How are we going to continue to address vulnerabilities, implement new compensating controls? We need to think ahead and have those processes in place, right? That's maybe step 6 or 7, right? I'm not saying start with that, but it's something that you need to give thought to as you're designing your controls, is how are we going to maintain these long term? How are we going to measure them and ensure that they exist? So with that, guys, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Again, I'm sure we could talk for another hour. Maybe we'll do a part 2 of this. But I thought, if you're okay, we'll just wrap up. We had a couple questions pop up. We'll wrap up with those. Let's see. So I guess, Ricky, this might be one for you, because you talked about doing the sort of the segmentation. Is what would you say is the best way to do your segmentation and maintain uptime, right? I think the question is how do you balance that, like, segmenting, but also not breaking stuff while you're doing it, right? Because I know, like, I worked in IT, the joke was like, I don't know who this belongs to. Oh, unplug the cable and you'll find
See
out.
who yells the loudest, right? Yeah.
But that doesn't work, obviously, with OT, right? We can't do that.
Yeah. I'm not unplugging a $25 million system that makes things that go boom. That's gonna cause a bad day for me, and it'll probably be a resume generating event, right? I don't want those. The spot to start for me is the discovery tools, and using what you have, right? Build an inventory of what you think you have, and then that's where you take that your starting point and your starting plan of, I want to identify my systems, and I need to identify the owners. Once I identify the systems and owners, document that, right? Use an ITSM. I use a spreadsheet if you have to, but put that information down somewhere where you can come back to it, because you're going to have questions for that team in the future. And if you actually document it, you'll be able to go back to it. So I'd say starting there is like, do that discovery and then take that inventory to that team that owns it and say, hey, does this look right to you? What are these systems for? And then you start to build, from that point, you're moving forward, building a clear picture of what you're actually working with. And then you can make intelligent decisions on, how do I secure this?
Oh, great. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, next one. Will, I throw this one to you, because you had talked about some of the sort of data sources that Fortinet has. And that is, what other tools are in the environment that can help with OT security, right? What I think they mean, like, what other tools do you already have sort of in your infrastructure that can help inform, kind of make better decisions around OT security?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got if you look at that transformation, right? And from an OT perspective, you go from the safety systems all the way to the cloud, right? Going up to the Purdue model. You've got your firewalls, your next generation firewalls, ruggedized switches, access points. You've got the SD-WAN. You've got your cloud security. You've got your NAC. Hopefully you have all those things, and then getting those into a system like FortiSIM, or into a SIM of any sort, that you're able to start doing that contextualization and correlation, that's gonna make the difference. And I'll echo what Ricky said. And if all else fails, get up off your desk, walk over and go talk to somebody about, hey, what do you own and why am I not seeing it? And that's another piece. Is like you may like, I know that we have a system in Jurong, but it doesn't show up anywhere in my firewall logs. It didn't show up in my SIM, it doesn't show anywhere. But having that knowledge of just knowing that I have that, so then you go talk to, why is that not coming? Oh, we're not sending our logs to you. Why not? No one's ever asked. So off you go, right? But you have to have that map, right? Or I need to know at least where I'm at. If I have 180 sites across the globe, do I have a map of where those are, and who is at least a site coordinator at each location? Because you're making money, somebody's in charge of those places.
Yep. Yeah, that was one of the big things, right? I worked with a fantastic business analyst in my past, and he was like, once I found him, I knew who was responsible for the budget and the books at every single one of those locations, and that was the keys to the kingdom at that point, because I then had a point of contact at every location that knew where their money was going, and those people knew each one of those people that were spending that money. And honestly, that's one of the I took that away from that. That's one of the best ways. Follow the money, right? Somebody knows where that money's going, or what's happening there.
And as I bring all that stuff into my SIM, and when I start finding those places that aren't there, I make that phone call. Because there's a reason a decision was made somewhere not sending that stuff off, whether they don't know it, or we're running a frac T and we can't send anything that direction. All right, let's figure out something. Let's batch it up there if we have to.
Yep.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, guys, I think we'll wrap it up there. But if there's any additional questions, please, send them to us after the webinar. You guys can reach out to us directly via email. Hey, maybe we'll do a follow-up webinar just to answer questions if we get some more good questions in. So, but guys, I can't thank you enough. I think this was a really great chat. I learned a lot from you guys. You guys are both just a wealth of knowledge in the OT and beyond field. So I thank you guys for joining us. I thank everybody. I hope the attendees today were able to take away some stuff from this, and it's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, John.
For having me.